I found the $60 fine taped to my front door at 7 in the morning, still dressed in my thermal underwear and nursing my first cup of coffee, already annoyed that someone had been on my property before sunrise. The notice was printed on official-looking letterhead with Pinewood Estates Homeowners Association, emblazoned across the top in an unnecessarily aggressive font, and the words "Violation Notice" stamped in red ink like I had committed some heinous crime. According to this piece of paper, I was being fined for parking my snowmobile in my driveway overnight, which apparently violated some obscure covenant I had never heard of in the 3 years I had lived here in Eagle River, Wisconsin. My name is Nathan Jensen, and I had moved to this subdivision thinking it would be a quiet place to settle down after spending most of my 20s bouncing between construction jobs across the Midwest. The house was modest but mine, a 3-bedroom ranch with a 2-car garage that sat on a corner lot with a decent-sized yard. The neighborhood seemed normal enough when I bought the place, full of families and retirees who kept to themselves and waved politely when you drove past. Nobody had mentioned that the HOA was run by a woman who apparently had nothing better to do than patrol the streets at dawn looking for minor infractions. I read the notice 3 times, my coffee getting cold in my hand. The fine stated that recreational vehicles, including snowmobiles, were not permitted to be parked in driveways or on the street overnight and must be stored in garages or not visible from the street. This was news to me. I had parked my snowmobile in my driveway dozens of times over the past 2 winters, and nobody had said a word. It was currently sitting there because my garage was full of boxes I was sorting through after finally getting around to unpacking some stuff from my move, and I had been too tired after a long day at work to shuffle everything around. The notice was signed by Margaret Whitmore, HOA president, with a phone number listed at the bottom. I checked my watch. 7:15 in the morning was probably too early to call someone and tell them exactly what I thought of their arbitrary fine, so I decided to wait until a more reasonable hour. In the meantime, I went outside to look at my snowmobile sitting innocently in my driveway, a perfectly maintained Polaris that I had bought used last year and took out on the trails every weekend during the season. There was nothing offensive about it. It was not leaking oil or covered in mud. It was just a snowmobile, parked neatly on the right side of my driveway, not blocking anything or causing any kind of problem. I looked around the neighborhood, noticing that my neighbor 2 doors down had a boat on a trailer that had been sitting in his driveway since last summer, and across the street, someone had an old pickup truck on blocks that had not moved in months. But apparently my snowmobile was the issue. I went back inside and pulled out the stack of HOA documents I had received when I closed on the house. I had skimmed them at the time, mostly focusing on the monthly dues and basic rules about lawn maintenance and exterior modifications. Now I went through them more carefully, looking for any mention of recreational vehicles. After 20 minutes of reading through dense legal language, I found it buried in Section 14, subsection C, paragraph 3, a single sentence stating that recreational vehicles must not be visible from the street for more than 24 consecutive hours. 24 consecutive hours. I had parked my snowmobile at around 6 the previous evening, which meant it had been there for roughly 13 hours when the fine was issued. I felt my blood pressure rising as I realized this Margaret Whitmore had either made a mistake or was deliberately misapplying the rules. Either way, I was not paying this fine. At 9 o'clock, I called the number on the notice. A woman answered on the second ring with a crisp, "Pinewood Estates HOA, Margaret speaking." "Hi, Margaret. This is Nathan Jensen from 2847 Oakwood Drive." I got a notice this morning about a fine for my snowmobile. Yes, Mr. Jensen, your vehicle was in violation of our covenants. Actually, I just read through the covenants and they state that recreational vehicles cannot be visible for more than 24 consecutive hours. My snowmobile had only been there for about 13 hours when you issued the fine. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Mr. Jensen, the spirit of the rule is to maintain the aesthetic quality of our neighborhood. Snowmobiles are an eyesore and should be stored properly. The spirit of the rule is not what the rule says. The actual rule gives me 24 hours. The fine should be rescinded. I will bring your concern to the HOA board at our next meeting, but in the meantime, the fine stands. You are welcome to appeal it formally in writing. When is the next board meeting? 3 weeks from yesterday. The second Tuesday of each month at 7 p.m. at the community center. 3 weeks. You expect me to pay a fine that was incorrectly issued and wait 3 weeks for the chance to dispute it? Mr. Jensen, I suggest you review your tone. The board takes these matters very seriously, and hostility will not help your case. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that losing my temper would not accomplish anything. I will be at that meeting. In the meantime, I am not paying this fine. That is your choice, but please be aware that unpaid fines accrue interest at 10% per month and can result in liens against your property. She hung up before I could respond. I stood in my kitchen, staring at my phone, trying to process the fact that this woman was threatening to put a lien on my house over a $60 fine that should not have been issued in the first place. This was insane. I spent the rest of that day moving boxes around in my garage until I had enough space to fit the snowmobile inside. Not because I thought I was wrong, but because I did not want to give Margaret any more ammunition. As I worked, my neighbor from across the street, an older man named Bill Henderson, walked over. "Got a notice from the HOA, huh?" he said, watching me wrestle a particularly heavy box. "How did you know?" Saw Margaret walking around with her clipboard this morning. She does it every few weeks, looking for violations. You are not the first person she has gone after. What about that pickup truck in your driveway, the one on blocks? Bill shrugged. I got a notice about that 6 months ago, fought it at a board meeting and lost. Ended up having to pay the fine and get the truck towed. Cost me more than the truck was worth. So she just does whatever she wants, pretty much. Margaret became HOA president about 2 years ago, right after she retired. Used to be a middle manager at some insurance company, and I think she misses having people to boss around. The board is just her and 2 other people who agree with everything she says. Nobody else wants to serve because it is a volunteer position, and most people have better things to do. This was not encouraging news. Has anyone ever challenged her? Like legally, one guy tried, spent a bunch of money on a lawyer. The problem is the HOA covenants give the board a lot of discretion, and judges generally side with HOAs unless you can prove they are acting in bad faith or discriminating. It is expensive and time-consuming, and most people just pay the fine and move on. I thanked Bill for the information and finished clearing my garage. By the time I was done, it was late afternoon, and I was exhausted. I pulled the snowmobile inside and closed the garage door, feeling like I had let Margaret win even though I knew I was just being practical. The next 3 weeks passed slowly. I found myself becoming hyper-aware of every aspect of my property, making sure my lawn was perfectly maintained. My trash cans were put away immediately after collection, and nothing about my house could possibly be construed as a violation. I did not want to give Margaret any excuse to fine me again. During this time, I did some research on HOA law in Wisconsin. I learned that homeowners associations were governed by a combination of state law and their own covenants, which were essentially private contracts that all homeowners agreed to when they bought their property. The covenants gave HOA boards significant power, but that power was not unlimited. Boards were required to follow their own rules consistently, apply them fairly to all residents, and act in the best interest of the community. If they failed to do those things, their decisions could be challenged. I also found out that HOA board meetings were required to be open to all homeowners, and residents had the right to speak during designated comment periods. I planned to attend the meeting and make my case clearly and calmly, armed with the exact wording of the covenant and the timeline of when my snowmobile had been parked. The night of the meeting, I arrived at the community center at 6:45, wanting to be early. The community center was a modest building at the entrance of the subdivision, with a large multi-purpose room that was used for various neighborhood events. When I walked in, I saw about a dozen other residents already seated in folding chairs facing a table at the front of the room where 3 people were setting up. Margaret Whitmore was easy to identify. She was probably in her late 50s, with short blonde hair styled in a way that suggested she visited a salon regularly. And she wore a business casual outfit that seemed overly formal for a volunteer HOA meeting. She was arranging papers and talking to the 2 other board members, a thin man with glasses who looked perpetually nervous and a heavyset woman who seemed more interested in her phone than the meeting. I took a seat in the 3rd row and waited. Other residents trickled in over the next few minutes, and by 7 o'clock, there were about 20 people in the room. Margaret called the meeting to order by tapping a gavel on the table, which struck me as unnecessarily theatrical. Good evening, everyone. I am Margaret Whitmore, HOA President, and this is our monthly board meeting. We will begin with the approval of last month's minutes, followed by committee reports, old business and new business. At the end, we will have a homeowner comment period. The next 45 minutes were mind-numbingly boring. The board discussed the budget for landscaping the common areas, debated whether to repair or replace a fence near the playground, and reviewed bids from snow removal companies for the upcoming winter. I tried to pay attention, but my mind kept drifting to what I was going to say when it was finally my turn to speak. Finally, Margaret announced the homeowner comment period. We now open the floor to comments from residents. Please state your name and address before speaking, and keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. An older woman stood up and complained about a neighbor's dog barking at night. A man in his 30s asked about the timeline for repaving some of the streets. Then it was my turn. I stood up, and Margaret's expression hardened slightly when she saw me. Nathan Jensen, 2847 Oakwood Drive. I am here to dispute a fine I received 3 weeks ago for parking my snowmobile in my driveway. According to the covenant, recreational vehicles cannot be visible from the street for more than 24 consecutive hours. My snowmobile was parked for approximately 13 hours when the fine was issued. Based on the actual language of the covenant, the fine was issued incorrectly and should be rescinded. Margaret did not miss a beat. Mr. Jensen, the board has reviewed your fine and determined it was issued correctly. While the covenant specifies 24 hours, the board has the discretion to enforce the spirit of the rules, which is to maintain neighborhood aesthetics. The covenant does not mention anything about discretion or the spirit of the rules. It gives a specific time frame, which was not met. The nervous-looking man on the board, whose nameplate identified him as Roger Simmons, spoke up. Mr. Jensen, we appreciate your concern, but the covenants do grant the board authority to interpret the rules as we see fit. This is standard for HOAs. Interpretation is one thing, but this is not interpretation. This is ignoring what the rule actually says and applying a different standard. That is not fair or consistent. Margaret's smile was thin and cold. Mr. Jensen, I understand you are upset, but the decision has been made. If you wish to challenge it further, you are welcome to pursue legal action, though I would caution you that such actions are expensive and rarely successful. I felt the frustration building in my chest. I am not trying to be difficult. I am just asking you to follow your own rules. And we are. Your 3 minutes are up. Thank you for your comment. I sat down, my face hot with anger and embarrassment. A few other residents spoke after me, and I barely heard what they said. When the meeting finally adjourned at 8:30, I walked out into the cold night air, feeling defeated. As I was getting into my truck, a woman approached me. She looked to be in her late 40s, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and tired eyes that suggested she worked long hours. "Hey, I am Olivia Brooks. I live over on Maple Court. I just wanted to say I think what Margaret did to you is complete garbage." "Thanks. Seems like there is not much I can do about it, though. Maybe not alone, but you are not the only person she has gone after. I got fined last month because my trash can was visible from the street on a non-collection day. Never mind that the wind had knocked it over and I was at work. Another neighbor got fined because their lawn was a 1/4 inch too long according to Margaret's ruler. She is out of control. Your neighbor Bill mentioned something similar to me, said a lot of people have been fined. More than you would think. Most people just pay because it is easier than fighting. But if enough of us band together, maybe we can do something about it. There are procedures for recalling board members or calling special elections. It is in the bylaws. This was interesting. You have read the bylaws. I have read everything. I am a paralegal, so I am used to dealing with this kind of documentation. When I got my fine, I went through all the HOA documents looking for a way to fight back. The bylaws require a petition signed by 20% of homeowners to call a special election for board positions. There are about 160 homes in this subdivision, so we would need signatures from at least 32 homeowners. You think we could get that many? I think we could get more. Margaret has made a lot of enemies. The problem is getting people organized. Everyone is busy, and it is easy to just pay the fine and move on with your life. But if we had someone willing to take the lead, someone who could rally people together, I think we could make it happen. She was looking at me expectantly. You think I should do that? You just stood up to Margaret in front of the whole board. That takes guts. And you are right about what you said. She is not following the rules, and that is not okay. I thought about it. I had never been particularly political or confrontational. I was the kind of guy who showed up, did my job, and went home. But something about this situation felt fundamentally unfair, and the idea of just rolling over and accepting it did not sit right with me. Okay, I am in. What do we need to do? Olivia smiled for the first time since we had started talking. First, we need to identify who else has been fined or has issues with Margaret. Then we need to start collecting signatures. I will draft a petition based on the bylaws. Can you start reaching out to neighbors? Yeah, I can do that. We exchanged phone numbers, and I drove home feeling like maybe this was not over after all. Over the next few days, I started talking to neighbors, both in person and through the subdivision's unofficial Facebook group. I was surprised by how many people had stories about Margaret and the HOA board. Some were minor annoyances, like being told their mailbox was the wrong shade of black, but others were more serious fines for violations that seemed arbitrary or unfairly applied. One family had been fined $500 for installing a swing set in their backyard, without prior approval, even though the covenants did not require approval for backyard improvements. Another resident had been threatened with legal action for painting their shutters a color that was supposedly not on the approved list, even though 3 other houses on the same street had the exact same color. The more people I talked to, the clearer it became that Margaret was using the HOA as her personal fiefdom, enforcing rules selectively and interpreting them in whatever way suited her purposes. Within a week, Olivia and I had identified more than 40 homeowners who were willing to sign a petition calling for a special election. Olivia drafted the petition according to the bylaws, and we started collecting signatures. Most people were eager to sign, though a few were hesitant, worried about retaliation from Margaret. "What if she starts looking for violations at my house specifically?" one woman asked when I knocked on her door. "She probably will," I admitted. "But if we do this right and get her off the board, it will not matter. And in the meantime, we can document everything and show a pattern of harassment if it comes to that." She signed. By the end of the second week, we had 53 signatures, well over the required threshold. Olivia submitted the petition to the HOA board via certified mail, along with a formal request for a special election to be held within 30 days, as required by the bylaws. 3 days later, I received a letter from Margaret. It was not sent through certified mail or delivered by hand. It was simply placed in my mailbox, which I later learned was actually illegal since it bypassed the postal service. The letter informed me that I was now being fined an additional $200 for frivolous and vexatious conduct, and for organizing an insurrection against the lawfully elected board. I stared at the letter in disbelief. Organizing an insurrection. We had followed the exact procedures laid out in the bylaws. There was nothing frivolous or vexatious about it. This was pure retaliation, and it was so blatant that I almost laughed. I called Olivia immediately. "Did you get a letter from Margaret?" "Yep, just found it." $200 fine for being a troublemaker, basically. This is insane. She cannot just fine people for exercising their rights under the bylaws. Actually, this might be the best thing that could have happened. This is clear retaliation, and it shows exactly the kind of abuse we have been talking about. We should document everything and consider filing a formal complaint. With who? There are a few options. We could file a complaint with the Wisconsin Department of Financial Institutions, which oversees some HOA regulations. Or we could go straight to a lawyer and explore legal action for harassment and abuse of power. I had been hoping to avoid lawyers and legal action, but Margaret seemed determined to escalate things. Let me think about it. In the meantime, what is happening with the special election? According to the bylaws, the board has to acknowledge receipt of the petition within 10 days and schedule the election within 30 days of that acknowledgement. We are on day 4 since I mailed it. I am betting Margaret is going to try to ignore it or claim it is invalid for some made-up reason. Olivia was right. On day 9, we received a response from the board, not to the group of petitioners, but individually to each person who had signed. The letter stated that the petition was invalid because it did not follow proper procedure, claiming that petitions had to be submitted at a regular board meeting, not via mail, and that the signatures had not been properly notarized. I read through the bylaws again that night, going over every word related to petitions and special elections. There was no mention of petitions needing to be submitted at a board meeting. There was no mention of notarization. Margaret was making things up. Olivia confirmed my reading. She is lying. The bylaws are clear. Petitions can be submitted by mail and there is no notarization requirement. She is betting that people will not check and will just give up. So what do we do? We show up at the next regular board meeting with copies of the bylaws and copies of the petition, and we demand that they schedule the election, and we bring as many people as we can. The next board meeting was 2 weeks away. Olivia and I spent that time organizing. We created a simple website laying out the issues with Margaret's leadership and providing copies of all the relevant documents. We posted in the Facebook group, sent emails, and knocked on doors. By the time the meeting rolled around, we had more than 70 homeowners committed to attending. The community center was packed when I arrived. Every seat was filled, and people were standing along the walls. Margaret looked visibly shaken when she walked in and saw the crowd, but she composed herself quickly and called the meeting to order. The regular business was rushed through in record time, and when Margaret tried to move directly to adjournment without a homeowner comment period, Olivia stood up. Point of order. The bylaws require a homeowner comment period at every regular meeting. You cannot skip it. Margaret's jaw tightened. Very well. Homeowner comments. Keep it brief. Olivia spoke first, calmly and clearly laying out the timeline of the petition, the response from the board, and the specific sections of the bylaws that proved the board's response was incorrect. She had printed copies of everything and distributed them to the audience. When she finished, she looked directly at Margaret. The petition was submitted correctly. It has the required number of signatures. The board is legally obligated to schedule a special election within 30 days. We are now on day 18, and no election has been scheduled. This is a violation of the bylaws and a dereliction of duty. Margaret tried to interrupt, but another homeowner stood up, a retired man named Frank who had lived in the subdivision for 15 years. I have been in this neighborhood longer than almost anyone here, and I have never seen the board act this way. Margaret, you are supposed to be serving the community, not treating us like subjects. Schedule the election. One by one, other residents stood and spoke. Some shared their own stories of unfair fines and arbitrary enforcement. Others simply expressed their support for the petition and their desire for new leadership. The meeting stretched past 9 o'clock, then 9:30. Margaret tried several times to end the comment period, but each time, someone would cite the bylaws showing that there was no time limit on comments as long as residents wished to speak. Finally, at nearly 10 o'clock, Margaret relented. Fine. The board will schedule a special election. Details will be posted within the week. This meeting is adjourned. She banged her gavel and stormed out of the room, followed by the other 2 board members. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers. Olivia and I exchanged exhausted smiles. We had won this round, but I had a feeling Margaret was not done fighting. The special election was scheduled for 5 weeks later, on a Saturday afternoon. According to the bylaws, any homeowner in good standing could run for the board positions. Olivia decided to run for president. I agreed to run for one of the other board seats, and we found a third candidate, a retired accountant named George Patterson, who had been fined for having a garden gnome in his front yard. Margaret, Roger, and the other board member, whose name I learned was Linda Sullivan, all filed to run for re-election. The campaign, if you could call it that, was bizarre. Margaret sent out a mass mailing to all homeowners warning about the radical elements trying to take over the HOA, and promising that she would protect property values and neighborhood standards. Olivia responded with a simple flyer outlining her platform: fair enforcement of rules, transparency in decision-making, and respect for homeowners' rights. In the weeks leading up to the election, things got nasty. I received another fine, this time for having my garbage can visible from the street 15 minutes before the designated time window on collection day. I had put it out at 6:45 a.m., and the covenant specified 7 a.m. Margaret, or someone working for her, must have been watching my house specifically to catch me in a violation. Other people who had signed the petition reported similar harassment, fines for minor or non-existent violations, threatening letters about legal action. One family was told their children's chalk drawings on the driveway violated the covenant against defacement of property. We documented everything. Olivia compiled a file with copies of all the fines, photos showing inconsistent enforcement, and testimonials from residents. She also discovered something interesting. Margaret had been paying herself for administrative services out of the HOA budget, something that was not disclosed in the financial reports distributed to homeowners, and was potentially illegal depending on how the HOA was classified under Wisconsin law. "This could be fraud," Olivia said when she showed me the documents. "If the HOA is classified as a nonprofit, which most are, board members cannot pay themselves without proper disclosure and approval from the membership. These payments were never disclosed. How much money are we talking about?" "Looks like about $15,000 over the past 2 years. Not a fortune, but definitely enough to be criminal if she was hiding it." "Should we go to the police?" Olivia hesitated. "Let me talk to a lawyer friend first. I want to make sure we have our facts straight before we accuse her of a crime." The election was held in the community center on a cold Saturday in late November. Turnout was massive. More than 100 homeowners showed up to vote, which was unprecedented. The bylaws required a simple majority to elect board members, and when the votes were counted, the results were decisive. Olivia received 78 votes for president. Margaret received 34. George and I both won our seats by similar margins. Margaret did not take the loss well. She stood up when the results were announced and addressed the room, her voice shaking with anger. "You people have no idea what you have done. This neighborhood will fall apart without proper leadership. Property values will plummet. You will regret this." Then she walked out, taking her box of HOA files with her. Over the next few days, Olivia, George, and I met to discuss the transition. According to the bylaws, the new board was supposed to take office immediately after the election, and the outgoing board was required to turn over all HOA records, financial documents, and assets within 7 days. Margaret was not responding to emails or phone calls, and she had not provided any of the required materials. On day 8, Olivia sent a formal demand letter via certified mail, stating that Margaret's failure to turn over HOA property was a violation of Wisconsin law and could result in legal action. 2 days later, 3 boxes of files were left on Olivia's doorstep in the middle of the night, jumbled and disorganized with no explanation. As we went through the files, Olivia's earlier suspicions were confirmed. Margaret had been paying herself a monthly administrative fee of $625, totaling $15,000 over 2 years, without any approval from the membership or disclosure in the financial reports. Even more concerning, there were multiple invoices from a landscaping company owned by Margaret's husband, charging rates significantly higher than market value. Cross-referencing these invoices with bank statements showed that the HOA had paid this company more than $30,000 over the same period. "This is definitely fraud," Olivia said, sitting back in her chair. "She was using the HOA as her personal piggy bank. We need to report this." "Are you sure? I mean, I want her held accountable, but I do not want to ruin her life if there is some explanation." "Nathan, she stole from the HOA, from all of us. Our dues went into her pocket instead of being used for the neighborhood." and she was harassing people who questioned her because she did not want anyone looking at the finances. This is serious. She was right. We contacted the Vilas County Sheriff's Office and filed a report. A detective named Sarah Kowalski was assigned to the case, and we turned over all the financial documents. Detective Kowalski was thorough and professional, taking detailed notes and asking pointed questions about how the HOA operated and what level of oversight existed. HOA fraud cases are tricky, she explained. Because HOAs are private organizations, there is sometimes confusion about what constitutes a crime versus just poor management. But if we can show that she intentionally misrepresented the finances and paid herself without authorization, that is theft. And if her husband's company was overcharging with her knowledge, that could be conspiracy to commit fraud. The investigation took several weeks. During that time, the new board got to work fixing the problems Margaret had created. We revised the fine structure to be more reasonable and instituted a formal appeals process. We hired a new landscaping company at a much lower rate. We also passed a rule requiring all board financial decisions over $500 to be approved by a vote of the homeowners, ensuring transparency. The neighborhood response was overwhelmingly positive. People were relieved to have a board that actually listened to them and applied rules fairly. The few supporters Margaret had quietly disappeared once the financial irregularities became known. In mid-January, Detective Kowalski called me with an update. We have enough evidence to move forward with charges. Margaret Whitmore is being charged with theft and misconduct in office. Her husband is being charged as an accessory for his role in the landscaping scheme. They will be arraigned next week. What happens now? That depends on a lot of factors. If they plead guilty, they could face fines and restitution, possibly probation or jail time depending on the judge. If they fight it, it will go to trial, which could take months. Either way, they will have to answer for what they did. The arraignment was held at the Vilas County Courthouse on a gray Tuesday morning. I attended with Olivia and several other residents who wanted to see justice served. Margaret and her husband, a balding man in his 60s who looked like he wished he could be anywhere else, stood before the judge as the charges were read. Both pleaded not guilty, and bail was set at $10,000 each. As they left the courtroom, Margaret saw me in the gallery. Her face twisted with rage, and she mouthed something I could not quite make out, but the hatred in her eyes was unmistakable. Her husband pulled her away before she could make a scene. The case moved slowly through the legal system, as these things tend to do. In the meantime, life in the subdivision returned to something resembling normal. The new board held regular meetings that were actually productive instead of being exercises in authoritarian control. Fines were issued only when genuinely warranted, and the appeals process meant people had a fair chance to contest them. I never received another fine for my snowmobile, which now had a permanent spot in my garage during the off-season. On weekends, I would take it out to the trails and enjoy the freedom of riding through the Wisconsin wilderness, the cold air sharp against my face, all my stress melting away. It was a reminder of why I had moved here in the first place, to have a quiet life doing the things I enjoyed. In March, Margaret and her husband accepted a plea deal. Margaret pleaded guilty to theft and was sentenced to 18 months in county jail, though the judge indicated she would likely serve less with good behavior. She was also ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA, which amounted to nearly $45,000 when all the fraudulent payments and overcharges were tallied up. Her husband pleaded guilty to conspiracy and received probation, a hefty fine, and community service. At the next HOA meeting, Olivia announced the resolution of the case and the restitution that would be coming back to the HOA. The money would be used to fund several improvement projects that had been delayed due to budget constraints, including repaving the main roads through the subdivision and updating the playground equipment. "This has been a long and difficult process," Olivia said, addressing the room. "But I think we have all learned something important about the need for accountability and transparency in how our community is governed. We are not perfect, and we will make mistakes, but I promise you that this board will always act in good faith and in the best interests of all homeowners." The room erupted in applause, and I felt a sense of satisfaction that I had not expected. When I had first found that fine taped to my door all those months ago, I had been angry and frustrated, but I had never imagined it would lead to uncovering fraud, removing a corrupt board, and ultimately making the neighborhood a better place for everyone. After the meeting, several people came up to thank me for being willing to stand up to Margaret in the first place. I deflected the credit to Olivia, who had done most of the heavy lifting, but I appreciated the sentiment. One of the people who approached me was a young woman I recognized from the neighborhood but had never spoken to before. She introduced herself as Emily. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said. "I got fined last year for having the wrong color mailbox, and I was so upset, but I did not think there was anything I could do about it. Seeing you fight back made me realize that we do not have to just accept it when someone abuses their power." "I am glad it worked out," I said. "Honestly, I was just mad about the snowmobile. I did not expect any of this," she laughed. "Sometimes the smallest things turn into the biggest fights, but it was worth it." Over the following months, the subdivision continued to improve. With the restitution money, the roads were repaved, the playground was updated with new equipment, and we even installed a small dog park in one of the common areas. Something residents had been requesting for years, but that Margaret had always refused. The new board worked well together. Olivia was an excellent president, organized and fair-minded. George brought financial expertise that helped us create a more transparent budget process. And I found that I actually enjoyed serving on the board, despite my initial reluctance. It was satisfying to be part of making decisions that directly improved people's lives in small but meaningful ways. By the time summer rolled around, the drama with Margaret felt like a distant memory. I spent my evenings working on my yard, which I kept meticulously maintained, not because I was worried about fines, but because I took pride in it. I got to know my neighbors better, attending backyard barbecues and helping out with various community projects. One Saturday in July, I was washing my truck in the driveway when Bill Henderson walked over, the same neighbor who had warned me about Margaret all those months ago. "You did good, Nathan," he said, shaking my hand. "I have lived in a lot of places, and this is the first HOA I have ever seen that actually works the way it is supposed to. You should be proud." "It was a team effort," I said, "but thanks. I just hope it stays this way. It will as long as people stay involved." That was Margaret's biggest advantage. Everyone else was too busy or too apathetic to pay attention, so she could do whatever she wanted. Now people are engaged. That makes all the difference. He was right. The experience had taught me that bad things happen not just because bad people exist, but because good people stand by and do nothing. If I had just paid that initial $60 fine and moved on, Margaret would still be in power, still stealing from the HOA, still making life miserable for anyone who crossed her. But because I chose to fight back, with the help of people like Olivia and dozens of others who were willing to stand up, we changed things. That fall, as snowmobile season approached again, I made sure my garage was organized and ready so I would not have to leave the sled in the driveway overnight. Not because I was worried about being fined, but because it was the right thing to do according to the covenants I had agreed to when I bought the house. The difference was that now the rules were being applied fairly and consistently to everyone, not weaponized against people Margaret did not like. On a particularly cold November evening, I was in my garage working on the Snowmobile, doing some routine maintenance to get ready for the season, when Olivia stopped by. She had become a good friend over the past year, someone I could rely on and trust. "Got a minute?" she asked. "Sure, what is up?" "I wanted to talk to you about the board. My job is getting really demanding, and I am not sure I can commit the time to being president anymore. I am thinking about stepping down at the end of my term and not running for re-election. That is a big decision." "Have you thought about who would replace you?" She looked at me meaningfully. "I was hoping you would consider it. You have been great on the board and people respect you. I think you would do a good job." I had not expected this. "I do not know. I mean, you are way more qualified than me. You actually know what you are doing. Nobody knows what they are doing when they start, but you have good judgment, you are fair, and you care about the community. That is what matters. Just think about it." I promised I would, though I was not sure how I felt about the idea. Being a board member was one thing, but being president seemed like a much bigger responsibility. Still, I had learned over the past year that sometimes you have to step up even when you do not feel ready, because if you do not, someone else will, and they might not have the community's best interests at heart. As winter set in and the trails opened up, I spent my weekends riding my snowmobile through the pristine Wisconsin wilderness, the machine humming beneath me as I navigated through forests and across frozen lakes. There was something meditative about it, just me and the machine and the vast expanse of white. It gave me time to think about everything that had happened. A year ago, I had been a guy who just wanted to live quietly and be left alone. Now, I was on the HOA board, actively involved in community governance and apparently being recruited to run for president. Life had a funny way of pushing you in directions you never expected. But looking back, I would not change anything. The fight with Margaret had been frustrating and time-consuming, but it had also connected me to my community in a way that never would have happened otherwise. In December, the board held a holiday party at the community center, a casual event where residents could mingle and celebrate the progress that had been made. The turnout was impressive, with more than 80 people showing up, including families with kids running around and playing games. It felt like a real community, something that had been missing under Margaret's reign. At one point during the party, I found myself talking with a group of neighbors about the upcoming board elections. Several people encouraged me to run for president, echoing what Olivia had said. I deflected, saying I had not decided yet, but I could feel myself warming to the idea. Later that night, as I was helping clean up after the party, Olivia pulled me aside. "So, have you thought about what I asked?" "I have," I said. "And I am still not sure I am the right person for the job. But if you really think I should do it, I will," she smiled. "I think you should, and I will help you. Just because I am stepping down does not mean I am disappearing. I will still be around and I can advise you on anything you need." "Okay," I said, feeling a mix of anxiety and excitement. "Let's do it." I filed my candidacy the next week. There were 2 other candidates, both perfectly nice people who had been involved in various neighborhood committees. The campaign was low-key and friendly, more about outlining visions for the neighborhood than attacking opponents. In the end, I won with a comfortable majority, and in January, I was sworn in as the new HOA president. The transition was smoother than I expected, largely because Olivia had set up good systems and processes that I could follow. My first few months were spent learning the ropes, meeting with committee chairs, reviewing budgets, and handling the day-to-day administrative tasks that came with the position. It was more work than I had anticipated, but it was also rewarding. One of my first acts as president was to formally update the covenants to clarify some of the ambiguous language that Margaret had exploited. We created clear definitions, specific timelines, and explicit procedures for everything from parking regulations to architectural modifications. We also instituted term limits for board members, ensuring that no one could entrench themselves in power the way Margaret had. The process required a vote of the homeowners, and I was nervous about whether people would support such significant changes. But when the vote was held in February, the amendments passed with more than 80% approval. It felt like a validation of everything we had been working toward, a sign that the community trusted the new direction. As spring arrived and the snow melted away, I packed up my snowmobile for the season, carefully covering it and storing it in the back of my garage where it would wait patiently for next winter. Looking at it, I thought about that first fine, the one that had started this whole journey. $60 for parking my snowmobile in my driveway overnight, issued incorrectly by a woman who thought she could bully people into submission. If someone had told me a year and a half ago that this fine would lead to uncovering fraud, sending someone to jail, and completely transforming our HOA, I never would have believed them. But life is unpredictable that way. Sometimes the smallest injustices spark the biggest changes. I walked out of my garage and looked around the neighborhood. Kids were riding bikes in the street. Neighbors were out working in their yards, talking and laughing with each other. There was a sense of ease and community that had not existed before. It was not perfect, it never would be, but it was better, and that was worth fighting for. My phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. "Board meeting tonight at 7. Do not forget." I smiled and replied that I would be there. Then I went inside my house, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and sat on my back deck, enjoying the warm spring afternoon. In a few hours, I would head to the community center and spend the evening discussing budgets and maintenance schedules and resident concerns. It was not glamorous work, but it mattered. And as I sat there, relaxing in the home I had fought to protect from arbitrary rules and corrupt leadership, I realized I had found something I had not been looking for when I moved to this quiet Wisconsin subdivision. I had found purpose. I had found community. And I had learned that sometimes the right thing to do is stand up and fight, even when it would be easier to just pay the fine and move on. The sun was setting over the neighborhood, casting everything in a golden light, and for the first time in a long time, everything felt exactly as it should be. My snowmobile was safely stored away, waiting for next season. My house was mine, truly mine, without the threat of arbitrary fines or corrupt board members. And the neighborhood was a place where people actually wanted to live, not just a collection of houses governed by fear. I finished my beer and checked the time. Still an hour before the meeting. Enough time to change into something more presentable than the jeans and flannel shirt I had been wearing all day. As I stood up to head inside, I noticed Bill Henderson waving from his yard across the street. I waved back, and he gave me a thumbs up. It was a small gesture, but it meant something. It meant that what we had done here mattered, that the work we had put in to create a fair and transparent HOA had made a real difference in people's lives. And as I walked inside to get ready for the meeting, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that I had played a part in that. The HOA meeting that night was productive and uneventful, which was exactly how they should be. We discussed plans for the summer months, approved a contract for pool maintenance at the community pool, and heard from residents about various concerns. Nobody yelled. Nobody stormed out. Nobody issued arbitrary fines. It was boring in the best possible way. After the meeting, a few of us grabbed drinks at a local bar, a tradition that had started informally as a way to decompress after dealing with HOA business. George was telling a story about his grandkids, and Olivia was laughing at something on her phone. These were my people now, I realized. This was my community. And it had all started with a $60 fine for parking my snowmobile in my own driveway. Sometimes the universe works in strange ways. That fine, which had seemed like such an injustice at the time, had led to something much bigger. It had exposed corruption, brought a community together, and taught me that ordinary people have more power than they realize when they are willing to stand up for what is right. As I drove home that night through the quiet streets of Pinewood Estates, past houses where lights glowed warmly in windows and families settled in for the evening, I felt grateful for all of it. The fight, the frustration, the victory, and the ongoing work of keeping our community on the right track. It was not the life I had planned when I moved here, but it was a good life nonetheless. And next winter, when the snow fell and the trails opened up again, I would pull my snowmobile out of the garage and ride through the wilderness, feeling free and alive, knowing that I could come home and park it wherever I wanted on my own property without fear of arbitrary punishment. Because that is what freedom looks like in a well-run community. The ability to live your life, follow reasonable rules, and trust that those in power will treat you fairly. Margaret was serving her time, dealing with the consequences of her actions. The HOA was thriving under new leadership. And I was exactly where I needed to be, living in a home I loved in a community that actually felt like a community. All because I refused to pay a $60 fine that never should have been issued in the first place. Justice, I had learned, sometimes takes a while. But when it finally arrives, it is worth the wait.